Today is Tuesday, the 7th of April, 2009. We're at the Buffalo Erie County Historic Society. My name is Wayne Clark. And sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth, please?
Alton Lindberg, and I was born in Sweden in 1916, March 28th.
All right. And when did you come to the States?
September 23rd, 1923.
Okay. And so you were about 7 years old at the time?
7 years old, yeah.
And what did your parents do for a living?
Well, my dad worked at Naval in Jamestown most of his life, and my mother was a homemaker. Sometimes she worked in a laundry occasionally.
And did you go to school in Jamestown?
I went to school in Jamestown. Grammar school and junior high. My father, my stepfather, he had a 2-year education, so when I got in 8th grade, he thought that was like going through college. So, and we lived on a farm during the Depression, so he made me get out of school and go to work on a farm.
Okay. And do you remember where you were when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Oh, yes. Yes. I was working in the morning, and we were supposed to go out and pick up some Boy Scouts at 1 o'clock. And when I left the store, I didn't know it till we got down to pick it up. It was down near Casadega, I guess, area. And there was a man at the gate. He said, "Well, all the boys have gone home." I said, "Oh, gee, I was supposed to pick some of them up at 1. Well, he said, "Pearl Harbor has been attacked by the Japanese." And I said, "You're kidding." No, he said. So all the boys went, and of course, those days we didn't have radio in our cars, so that was the first I knew of it.
Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
Oh, yeah. Yes, very much so.
Okay. And I see that you went into the service February the 24th, 1944.
Right.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted. That was when they took men up to 38 years, and I was 28 at the time. In the grocery store, I had a partner, so I, of course, if we'd have got out of the store and got into war work, why would we just put the camera out? But I guess most of my friends were gone, so I figured I might as well go too. So we went to boot camp on the 24th, and there was an accelerated program. What usually took 6 months, we did in a month.
Now, whereabouts was your boot camp?
Sampson, New York.
Okay, what was Sampson like?
Well, it was a big, I don't know how big it was, but there were several different companies in there. There was 2 companies to a building, and I would say there was probably, well, we were a unit G, and there must have been A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or beyond that too. And of course, each unit there were several buildings together. We had our own recreation hall or a restaurant type thing that we could go to. And there was a lot of things that we didn't do because the weather was so bitterly cold in February down and there was a lake in Geneva, I guess, is right on there. And we were supposed to go out and row, but we never made it, so we rowed on dry land.
Okay, so your basic training was an accelerated program?
Yeah, usually your boot camp is 6 months, and we did it in a month. So I was apprentice seaman for a month, and I went home for a week, and I was seaman 2nd class.
Now, did you go on to any advanced schooling at all?
No. And when I got back to boot camp, my name was posted to go overseas. So then I was seaman 2nd for a week, then I became seaman 1st when they shipped us out. and I went across in the LST 624 in 23 days.
Okay, when, do you remember approximately when you went overseas?
Well, yes, very much so. We left on my wife's birthday, April 14th. And
Now,
then-
did you go over in a convoy or a single ship?
Yeah, we left from Bayonne, New Jersey for the Bay of Fundy, and that's where the convoy occurred. Convoy was Spur 86 was a code name, and it was composed of 176 ships. That was the biggest convoy up to that time. And we had two baby flat tops, and of course, then there were destroyers and corvettes circling continuously. And we were on LST, we were in, both outside rows were LST because they draw very little water, so torpedoes usually are set lower than that. And that is what the Germans were after anyway. They were after troop ships, and they were all pretty much congregated in the middle of the convoy. But we were the last ship in the outside lane, and it's what they call the coffin corner. And we flew the Baker the whole time. The flag, no smoking. We could only smoke on deck. And that wasn't too long after the LST. We had to have LCT on its deck, piggyback, and it's just about enough room to walk on the side of it because it takes up almost the whole deck.
Now, what was the seas like? Were they rough?
No, we went across in comparatively calm water the whole trip, the whole way across.
Did you get seasick at all?
No.
Okay.
But they dropped depth charges almost all night long around us, so and LST don't have a catapult, they roll them off the back. And when we rolled all ours up, we'd pull up in a lane all by ourselves, and then the next LST would drop back and drop whatever they had, I guess. But the corvettes or the destroyers were throwing them all around us, so. Now,
whereabouts did you land?
Londonderry, Ireland, and the first ship in either hit a mine or when it was hit anyway, it blew. And then the rest of us scattered down the coast, so our whole flotilla of LSTs, most of us put into Milford Haven, and they had submarine nets. They pulled them back when we went in. They let two ships in at a time, and then we stayed there for several days. Then I went to Plymouth, and we had that LCT that was on the deck. They they pumped out all the high octane gas that we were carrying in our ballast tanks, and we all had to get out and go 500 feet away while they emptied it. And that tilted the ship to the point where they just took the shocks off from under the LCT and it slid right off. It was on a grease platform or some sort.
Okay. Now, at that point, were you starting to prepare for the Normandy invasion?
No, we had no idea. All we knew is when we went over, and up till the time of the invasion, we had no idea where it was going. It was kind of funny because we come into Milford Haven, and it was in the morning. We were from Exeter, England, all night long, and so I asked the fellow. I said, "Where's the Montpellier? Or where's the T.B. Robertson?" He said, "It's that black ship out there." I said, "Where it's going?" Well, he said it's going south, someplace. Because we put a lot of butter. But I'm having a senior moment. A lot of tropical butter on it. And next year I asked, I said, "Well," he said, "it's going north because we put a lot of heavy underwear on." Well, there wasn't really underwear. It was gas impregnated underwear, and blankets it had on. And so then I guess it wasn't, well, for one thing, you know, I don't know how the Germans didn't know something was coming off. They must have, because every road and all around us was covered with tanks and trucks and jeeps. And of course, on ships, we only so many allowed on the deck at the same time, never very many. And so I suppose they could count, see how many was on. And then we left Milford Haven and went to Plymouth. And I guess that's where we pumped the gas out in some estuary there. And then we went to Exeter. Our orders were to the replacements at Exeter.
Mm-hmm.
And Exeter was well, it was the biggest supply dump in the whole ETO, I guess. And so we got up there, and then when they started calling for a draft, I was at a firing range for probably 4 or 5 days, and I was issued a carbine, and I carried that all the way through, never used it much. Well, I once in a while when I was on guard. And then there were 75 of us that come over on the LST as passengers, and we went to Exeter, and I had our orders under my top of my uniform, and somebody else had all our records in a tomato soup box, and we got into the station, and just 75 of us, so we went over. There was nobody from the Navy. There was an Army officer, so we went over. And he said, "Where's your officer?" I said, "We don't have an officer." Well, he said, where are you going?" Well, I took out our orders to go to Exeter. Well, he said, "There won't be a train to Exeter till 2 o'clock this afternoon." This was probably 8 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I'll turn you loose, but make sure to be back here." He said, "And you're not going to find much to eat around here, so if you find something, you better grab it." And so anyway, we broke into groups. I think there was 8 in our group. And we had a Jewish boy with us, Kovac, his name was, and he'd already figured out the money exchange, because we had issued British money. It didn't mean a thing to most of them. So when they saw how much something was, we'd ask Kovac. He said, "Oh, more again." And he had it all figured out. And I think we wound up by a bakery, and they had the whole window full of like we get the fruit things in a triangle type.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Gee, I know what those are." So I went in, I said, what they're filled? I said, "Usually with apple or something." And I said, "What are they filled?" "Oh, they're pasties," she says. "They're what?" "Pasties." And I said, "What's in them?" "Oh, you'll like them." So we bought about a dozen of them, I guess, whole big bag full. And the pasties are filled with potatoes.
Uh-huh.
So we all ate 1 or 2, I guess, and then we quit. That's all we had to eat, so we got to Exeter. So. And I don't know how far it is from Exeter, just a few hours, I guess. And then when they called for the drafts, of course, the 75 of us were brand new, so we all wound up in different groups going on different ships. And there were 7 of us that went to the Robertson. And then we got on the ship. They said, "Well, we're supposed to have 4 coxswains. Where are they?" We didn't have any coxswains. And so they called for volunteers. There was always somebody ready to volunteer. And we also, you're supposed to have 10 gunners. No gunners in our group. We were fresh from boot camp. Well, he said, "Any of you come over as a gun replacement?" And I was one of them. So he said, "You're going to be on a gun then. Have you ever been on a gun?" I said, "Yeah, I was on a gun coming across in the ocean, and we'd stand up and say, 'Bang, bang, bang.' That's as far as I've gone." But I was on a gun for about 3 nights, and then we got some more gunners. And we were, our designation was Comland Crab, as Commander of Landing Craft and Bases, and we got mail immediately. And so everybody got on board. Some come different groups, but they used our address because they get their mail quicker. So.
Mm-hmm.
And think it was probably the night we was on the 4th. We were called up at general quarters, and we're going to say, well, we'll be leaving sometime after 11 o'clock, after midnight, for somewhere in France. And they issued us French money and the phonetic dictionary and a few other things. And then they called it at 11 o'clock, they called it off because it was too rough. So then it went on, and then we left on the 5th. And we were port directors, and we were in the first wave because we were supposed to direct them in. When we got in there, high tide on that particular day was 24 feet at between 5 and 6, and that's when they were supposed to start landing the landing craft. But due to the rough water, it was, and we overshot our mooring because the beaches weren't marked at that time. So we got further in and we find out that we had a backtrack, and of course there's about 5,000 ships, boats, and everything pulling in there. So it was quite a job to get back to. When we got back there, then the beaches were marked. The Navy SEALs marked them, but they come in after we did, I guess. And Utah Beach was the first beach, then Omaha, and then Gold well, the British had two, and then the designation fails me right now.
I think Sword and Juno.
Juno and Gold and Juno and one other.
Sure.
And I think one of them was, two were manned by British, and the fifth one was manned by Australians and Canadians. And then, of course, they blew a hole in the Atlantic wall so we could get through. And when the Rangers come in to dismantle or destroy the guns, in Utah there weren't any guns there. There were 5 emplacements, but no guns. And they found them later in an orchard someplace, so that either were going to refurbish them or replace them. So our landings were very little, only a small arms fire was all.
So you landed on Utah?
Beach, yeah. So we sat off the shore just a short way and then directed all into the traffic. We were traffic cops, I guess. And all they had, we landed there with LSTs and a few LCTs. And they were in almost unopposed. And then that poor guys at Omaha, of course, they were climbing them cliffs. Thousands of men. When we come back, there were guys floating and dead, and they were picking up all the live ones. You see, when they come in on that time element there, by the time they started landing, which was 7 or after, the tide was starting to recede, so they got hung up on all the obstacles that the Germans had placed in the Seine there, in the bay. And so a lot of them drowned because they were in deep water and they had their packs on them.
Now, could you hear all the firing and everything going on,
yeah.
the bombardment?
The destroyer went in ahead of us, and they shot him at an angle from Omaha. That's the only way they could reach us. And see, the beach is covered 7 miles. So. But Utah was comparatively level, and we thought, gee, why? And that poor guy's trying to get up them cliffs when they could practically walk in here without any big opposition. But they didn't know that when they started out here.
And how much time did you were there on the first wave?
Yeah, first wave. We were in there by 6, I think, pretty much, and then. Of course, we couldn't find it. We didn't know where to land or where to anchor because nothing was marked at that point. So we got quite a ways in, and with all them ships pulled in, it was quite a job getting back to our original mooring. When we got back, then the beaches had been marked. So, but the destroyer that went in ahead of us, they blew that, and Then from there on, of course, the guns that were back in the hills were lobbing all big stuff in there. And the Texas, the one other battle wagon stood offshore. And of course, they were covering the landings to some extent, but then they also, they're the ones that hit the pillboxes that were on the shore there, and the ones in the back. We first got there, we were they were shelling us from way back, and they, of course, they put one in front, one in back, and the third one never came. And the same one on our one side, one on the other, and the third one never came because they had Piper Cubs observing, and of course they would see what was going on.
Now, how much time did you spend in that area before?
Well, we stayed there till, we were supposed to leave on October 6th, so we were there from June, July, August, September, and October. But our ship was in such bad shape, it took us 7 days to make it seaworthy. And then we went across, and then we picked up empty tanker and an Army tug in Cherbourg, and we had a British destroyer, and we got out and it started getting rough in the channel, and the Army tug started taking on water, so the destroyer escorted that back, leaving us in the tanker out there alone. And the tanker was empty, and we go on one side going backwards and the other side going forward. And it was one of those rough storms on that. And we were doing 45-degree rolls, and all the Liberty ship will take us 47 and keep going. Then the skipper said, we're going to run with the storm south, so we don't anticipate any opposition out there, just of submarines or E-boats. So we were supposed to land in Plymouth at 5, and we didn't get in until the next morning at 10. So we got not that far south.
Okay, after D-Day in the preceding months, whereabouts did you go next?
We stayed right there in Utah, and we kept landing LSTs until, well, September, or probably the end of September. They're never too far from the front. They're 400 miles from us. So then they got into Cherbourg at Brest.
So you constantly resupplied and brought troops in and out. Okay.
And they'd haul prisoners out, we'd see them. And then on July 25th, we got hit by 2 personnel bombs. And the planes come over fairly low. And by that time, we were mostly alone there. And few troop ships were in, so they hit our ship and one other one. And we only had 2 men injured. They were getting into the planes come over at a fairly high level, and we got the alert, and then we got the all clear, and then they come back at a low level and just saturated that whole beach area or that whole bay. And they only hit 2 ships. There weren't that many in there then. But the one ship they got, the Army personnel, a lot of the Army would sleep in the trucks rather than be down inside the ships. So they brought 14. We had a doctor aboard our ship. We didn't have a chaplain. And another doctor come over. They had 14 casualties that they brought over that were needed immediate attention. So most of the sailors were standing with plasma bottles, so we had nothing to hang them on. And some had legs and arms in bad shape, but they're pretty well shot up. So there was a lot of others that were just not severely injured. They took care of them themselves.
Okay.
Then from there we went to Plymouth for welfare and recreation. We were there for 2 weeks. I went to Falmouth for reassignment, and Falmouth, England, that's in the southern part, beautiful place. Falmouth, beautiful area. And so then it went, all our guys from our, were going on ships here and there, and I was left there all alone finally, so I went down to the personnel office and I said, I just wonder why I'm still here. Well, he said, I got a rate of storekeeper when we left the ship, or when we left France. And so he says, we can't locate your records. Well, I said, that can't be too tough. I said, I left Bayonne, New Jersey on that LST 624 and went to Exeter and got off. And that's where mine ended, evidently. And so it went along quite a while. I got that rate, but they couldn't locate my records. So I had no record of being in the invasion at all. Thanks to Bruce, they got it straightened out, I guess. But anyway, then I went to Exeter, a supply base, and I was there for almost a year. And
What were you doing at the supply base?
well, I had, my warehouse had furniture. Furniture included safes, caskets, and all kinds of stuff. And I was put in charge of that. And then I hadn't been there very long, and they told me to call and sit down, and they wanted me to take a test for a second class, so I took that and got that. And then after the war was over, they had the Senatorial Investigating Commission come over because they thought there was a lot of waste in supply bases. So they cut out the cigarettes first. They took nobody could buy cigarettes for a while. Well, then they were supposed to be there on a Friday. There were 6 men, but I guess they didn't sober them up till Sunday. And Sunday, I had to stand by the warehouse. But I was done dinner, and they called and said all DDPOs get back to their warehouses. The Senatorial Commission was entering the gates. Well, it took a while. They had only 5 when they got there. One admiral was with them, and our supply officers, several of them, senior and junior. And so they come into my warehouse, and I explained what I had and what I did. And they said, well, where do you keep your records? I said, here. So I went in, and then they walked around the warehouse, and each item, for a piece of furniture, had a thing on it with, to put the card in, so you kept track of all your, everything coming in, everything going out. So they picked out 6 of them, and then they went in the office, and I said they wanted to see them, so-and-so got it out. And they all jived. And they called the inventory control and said, we have 6 something, whatever it was. And he said, how many do you show? And they were all correct too. And that's the only warehouse they took them to. And I had just inherited an electrical warehouse next door because the guy went home. And most of it was in great big boxes on the floor. And I had no idea what was what, anything. And if they'd have gone in there, they'd have probably failed the whole thing. But they went in the carpenter shop, my warehouse, and some other area. I guess they went to the motor pool. And then I got a citation for that. And when our supply officer came in, he said, we got a citation here. And I said, what's for? Well, he said, I guess you saved our neck because your warehouse was in such good shape. And he says, if it had been otherwise, he said, the admiral would have kicked our captain's hind end, and he'd have picked my hind end. He says, and I'd have kicked yours, and you could kick whoever you could find. And we had Lieutenant Ireman. He was a wonderful officer.
Now, this was the end of the war. Do you remember what your reaction was when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt?
Oh yeah. But the night we weren't aware of when the war ended in Europe, and most of the guys, the base, at full strength, we were 2,300 men, and half of them were probably in town when they announced that. And it showed, the paper had a cartoon in it, and it shows our Navy Jeep going around, all Navy personnel report back by 12 o'clock or something like that. The clock on the tower showed 2, and the sailors were hanging out of the trees. Just a cartoon. And then when I went back to the States, I got on the Montpellier. That had been in the Pacific, and it was in for refurbishing. And they were short storekeepers, so I just got on that. There were 3 storekeepers that went on with me. And
now, did you think you'd be heading for the Pacific?
yeah, and when I was in Exeter, some of the guys started showing up in Exeter. It was a big base. We had our own theater and everything in there. And I said, what are you doing here? Well, he said, they're going to reactivate our old unit. And he said, you know what that means? Go to Japan. And of course, then that war ended too, so. But then on the Montpellier, that was going into Fleet Reserve, and they're going to use it for shakedown cruises for boot ensigns. And if I would sign up for 6 years, they would give me chief, and I'd stay with them Montpellier, and it would be based in Staten Island, and I'd have an apartment. There was a complex there, and I just couldn't visualize my wife and daughter living in New York City, so I didn't. I should have taken it, I guess, but I didn't.
Okay. Now, what was it like when you heard that the war with Japan was over? Was there a lot of celebrating?
Yeah, we weren't, nobody was off the base. They wouldn't let us off, they knew that. And it started, the guys were firing their guns, and they were throwing bricks up on the warehouses, they're corrugated, you know. And then they had a piano, they dragged that out in the middle of the square there. And they brought in a whole barrel of beer, I remember. Not beer drink, you know what I mean? And then they made sandwiches, and at midnight we had a big party. Then it started to rain. And so everybody was worried about getting that piano in out of the rain.
When, I see you were discharged in February of 46.
February 28th.
Okay. And when you were discharged, whereabouts were you discharged from?
From Sampson.
From Sampson? Okay.
I was in New York for about 2 weeks after I went back to go down to Montpellier because it was coming out of the Pacific. And when I got there, it says if we can catch that before it clears the locks, we'll fly it down to Panama because they're short storekeepers. But it's cleared it, so I said, can I get leave on delayed orders in? He said, no, we can't touch it. So I waited there for, well, almost 2 weeks before I got up there. So.
Okay.
Then I was on it for till February. So I was in December, January, February, March, November, I guess.
Okay, so you were discharged at Sampson.
Yeah.
Okay, did you make use of the GI Bill at all?
Not really.
Did you ever use it to buy a home, or?
No, I had a home, and I had a family, and I had a mortgage. So.
Okay.
But now I get a pension now, so I'm glad that I get that.
Was your pension service connected?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah. American Legion.
Okay. Have you stayed in contact with anyone you were in the service with?
I stayed in contact with 2 or 3 guys for a while, and the last one is J. Jackson, he lived in East Alton, now he lives down here, just outside of, what's that hospital down? Well, anyway, and I haven't heard from him now since I went down to Shrewsbury. I used to have his phone number, and we used to get together here occasionally, and then out to his place in East Alton. Well, not East Alton, because he had an A-frame he built on 3 acres of land. And then he had a heart attack, and he was in Jamestown Hospital, but nobody didn't know that. And then he had a stroke. Between it, he was out in his land picking up stones. They built a fence, and he was stung by. So he had 38 bee stings. He says he was sicker with that than he was with either his stroke or heart attack. J. Jackson.
Did you ever attend any kind of reunions at all?
No. I wish we'd have had some with either Exeter or the Robertson. The Montpellier had one, and it was out in California. They had 2 of one California and usually one in on the East Coast. But I never attended either one of them. I didn't know enough guys there because I was just on it. So of course, while I was on it, some guys left and others come back from the 30 days.
How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life?
Well, I think possibly if I'd have been single, I would have stayed in.
Mm-hmm.
The storekeeper at a very good rate. But when you're married, I wanted to get home.
Mm-hmm. Okay, is there anything we might have missed that you'd like to touch on or bring up at all?
I'll probably think of a dozen things after I leave.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your interview.
You're welcome.
Go ahead.
There's a ship went down beside us, and we used to move at night quite often out of the position we held, and we come back, and there's a ship there with the bow down in the front, and we stood looking at our chief commissary steward, and he says, Lindberg, he says, I think that ship is built just like this one. He says, if I'm not wrong, one of the reefers is still out of the water. So we went over and looked, sure enough, and it had about 10 cases of 6-pound hams, tin hams, and 3 crates of eggs, and several cases of juice. It wasn't orange juice, papaya juice, concentrate, and 2 or 3 wooden pails of baker's jelly. We cleaned that right out. So we let it be known that we were going to have, we got back with the eggs and we weren't sure about them. So we cooked a couple, and they weren't really real fresh, but they're sure better than powdered eggs. So we got out there, we were going to have bacon, ham and eggs for breakfast. And I got up in the morning and I looked out, as I was in charge of supplies for the meals. I looked, and there were 58 LCTs tied up alongside us. They ate on our ship, and they slept on it, some of them. But after a while, they would scrounge some liver or some troop ship or whatever, or merchant ship, and eat with them because they had better food than we did. But anyway, so I looked, and I said, we better get some more ham out. I said, there's 58 small boats tied. It looked like an island. And I said, there are 2 on each ship. That means there's 116, 118, 16 more guys coming aboard. So all we did was slice it and put it in the steam tables.
Okay, any other stories?
There's a lot of them, but they don't come to mind.
All right.
I had well, he was a Jewish fella, and he was probably older than I was, and he was sitting looking real dejected, and I don't remember what he did. I said, what's your problem? Oh, he says, I got a girlfriend in England, and my wife at home. And I just got a letter from my girlfriend in England, and she'd gotten a letter that I said, written to my wife. So he said, I don't know what's going to happen when my wife gets the other letter. He probably committed suicide.
Oh, you never heard what happened?
No. And then we pulled when we were over there so long, we pulled lots. We all got a number to go back to England for a weekend, and so I got a real low number, but I didn't have anybody in England, so I traded some guy who had a high number, and then when we got all through, all those that didn't go, they took us up to Montpellier. It was a monastery off the coast, beyond, outside, in the channel. And they took 30 of us out there for a steak dinner, champagne steak, and so we all got ready to pay. I said, no, it's all paid for. You the guys that didn't get to England, that's your treat. And Montpellier was a big monastery that sat way, way up high. And the pictures of it quite often. And the Germans held that, and up on the very top they had a round table, white table, and they had a thing they could lower mirrors so they could look way out on the channel and all the way around. And the Germans used that, and they also had a catwalk, a round wheel, to use for an elevator. And during the war, they had American printers in there that walked that thing to raise supplies up that high. And the monastery itself it had huge fireplaces on each end of it. And of course, this was in the summer, they had used it. And then they had cells in the bottom of it. I guess the Germans used them too for Lee Mountain Shell.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for your interview.
You're welcome.